and to all the witnesses for participating here today. A couple of questions, and unless another member joins us, I may be the last one with questions before we adjourn. Let me start coming back to the urgent topic of COVID. Farm workers were deemed essential during the pandemic, as we've discussed repeatedly here today. But as a result, farm workers continue to work on the front lines of our food supply chains and often had few resources to protect themselves from the COVID-19 virus. Nearly 600,000 farm workers contracted COVID, and the food and agricultural workers in California, I know, have experienced the highest excess mortality during the pandemic, with a 39% increase compared to previous years. For Latinos specifically, the mortality rate reached 59%. According to findings from the National Agricultural Workers Survey, about 1/3 of U.S. farm workers live below the federal poverty level, and fewer than half have health insurance or sufficient paid sick leave. It's not a good combination we're describing here. Many do not qualify for unemployment insurance or other social safety nets because of their undocumented status. These are essential workers. As I mentioned in my earlier statement, I introduced the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act as my first bill to provide a pathway to permanency for farm workers and all essential workers. Mr. Rodriguez, can you discuss how the immigration status of farm workers has impacted them during the pandemic?
Well, it makes it extremely difficult. I mean, here you have a worker that doesn't have legal status in our country, and they feel, first of all, obligated because of the work that they do. That's what they're skilled at. That's what they've been doing. That's what they're knowledgeable about doing, and has been mentioned here today. I mean, that's the way they contribute to our nation in regards to making sure we have a secure food supply. So, because the pandemic came, was not a reason for them to leave and discontinue working in agriculture. They continued working. They showed up every day. They made sure that our crops production continued here within this nation, dairy farms working there and so forth. And they'll continue to do so, despite the fact that they did all this at great risk.
Let me just say their continued commitment and work, contributions to the supply chain, to the economy, despite the risks, despite the dangers, is nothing less than heroic. My next question is for Ms. Sorensen. Now, as I made reference again to my Citizenship for Essential Workers Act, it would cover more than 5 million immigrant workers that have continued to work in a number of sectors, not just agriculture, as essential workers, making sacrifices for all Americans throughout the pandemic. These workers and their households have paid $47.6 billion in federal taxes alone, an additional $25.5 billion in state and local taxes each and every year. Significant contributions to our nation's economy. However, they don't have the pathway to permanency and live and work in constant fear of deportation. Now, Ms. Renson, I heard you say earlier that you support permanent status for meat packers. I just want to make sure I heard that clearly again for the record. Meat packers, as you know, are not eligible for H-2A status, which you mentioned causes difficulty for pork producers to hire enough workers to carry out their operations. So if enacted, my bill would put meat packers on that pathway to citizenship. So the question is simple, yes or no. Am I correct in understanding you do support a pathway to citizenship for the workers in your industry?
I'm here to talk about the H-2A program, and I want to focus on the pieces that provide certainty to packers and to farmers. And
well, I know that a pathway to citizenship certainly provides that certainty and fairness for workers in your industry. As time is running out, I do have one more question that I think is critical to mention as we're facing not just drought, but constant extreme heat conditions throughout the West. As temperatures continue to rise across the country, more and more farm workers are at risk of experiencing heat illness, which can cause heat cramps, organ damage, heat exhaustion, stroke, or even death. In fact, between 1992 and 2017, heat stress injuries killed 815 U.S. workers and seriously injured more than 70,000. A recent report published by UCLA found that the financial costs of heat-related injuries in California alone are between $750 million and $1.25 billion each year. The study also found that on days with high temperatures above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, it's very common in the Central Valley and other parts of the state, workers have a 6 to 9% higher risk of injuries. That's particularly alarming given the ongoing increasing impacts of climate change. The Asuncion Valdivia Heat Illness and Fatality Prevention Act, which I'm a proud co-sponsor of, directs OSHA to implement a heat safety standard nationwide. California adopted its own heat stress standards, and as a result, workplace injuries declined significantly. I was a proud supporter of those state workplace standards in my prior service in state government. Unfortunately, it's not the case for vulnerable workers across the country, and I believe we need a national standard in place. Mr. Rodriguez, can you discuss what recourse immigrant farm workers have if they suffer from heat-related injuries?
Well, certainly in the state of California, we do have laws and legislation. In fact, when that legislation was passed, you drive down Highway 5 now and Highway 99 through the Central Valley, you'll see farmers that have put up coverings, tents, and so forth there for the workers to go when they actually get exposed to the heat, when the temperatures rise to be 90 degrees and up. They're provided with the water and so forth. The unfortunate thing is that that is one of the few states that actually have those protections for farm workers, so that the majority of farm workers still in this country are exposed to heat conditions that have caused, as you said, illnesses that have transpired time and time again, and even deaths. We recently had one in the state of Oregon that prompted state legislation, state regulations to take place there because of the fact that farm workers were dying, is that because of the exposure to heat that they're experiencing right now.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. I haven't just seen with my own eyes the statistics of the impact of that state bill, but I've seen with my own eyes the impact in the fields, having toured repeatedly over the years, including this last Friday in and around Fresno. Amazing what a simple concept of a little bit of shade, a little bit of fresh, cool water, and even access to a restroom in the fields can make. It shouldn't take state law to bring about those improvements in working conditions for agricultural workers, but if it does require state law to do it, California proudly has done it, and I believe essential farm workers across the country, regardless of the state that you live and work in, deserve the same protections. Want to thank all the witnesses for appearing before the committee today and for your participation. On behalf of Senator Durbin, I'm going to begin to conclude this hearing today. But before I do, I want to move to enter a number of statements into the record from a variety of organizations, including the Economic Policy Institute, the Farm Worker Justice, and Immigration Hub. Without objection, these statements will be included. The record will close 1 week from today. Now, in closing, this has been a great conversation, great discussion. As we've referenced so often, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. The House passed this bill that would provide a path to citizenship for undocumented farm workers and their families, meaning that they would be able to continue to do the work that this federal government has deemed essential. They'll continue to be able to do that work, but be able to do so without living in fear of being separated from their families. The Farm Workforce Modernization Act illustrates the kind of reforms our broken immigration system needs to help generate long-term economic growth, establishing a more secure foundation for consumers, for workers, and for employers, while growing our tax base and securing our food supply chain. So now it's our turn to act in the United States Senate. So on behalf of Chairman Durbin and myself, we pledge to do everything in our power, Senator Durbin as chair, myself as a member, chair of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, to move forward legislation to provide a pathway to citizenship for undocumented farm workers. Thank you all, and with that, this hearing is adjourned.